I was born into a family where love had a price tag. My parents, Richard and Elaine, loved to parade around as the perfect couple with perfect children. To the neighbors, we were a respectable family. Behind closed doors, I was the mistake. Always the shadow, the disappointment, the loser. My younger brother, Ethan, was the golden child, praised for his charm and looks. My sister, Clara, was the brain, always flaunted as the pride of the family. Me. I was the one who had to hold things together when the bills piled up, when the debts grew heavy, when my parents' reckless spending threatened to collapse everything. I started working young. While my friends were chasing dreams, I was chasing double shifts at a warehouse, waiting tables in the evenings. Anything that could bring home money. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That one day my family would see me as more than a walking wallet. Every paycheck I earned went straight to them. The mortgage, Ethan's tuition, Clara's endless study trips abroad. My parents would say a quick, "Thank you," before reminding me how I was still a failure compared to my siblings. It stung, but I swallowed the pain. I told myself that family meant sacrifice. That maybe, just maybe, if I gave enough, they would love me back. Then came the night of the accident. I was driving home from yet another late shift. My body was heavy, my eyes burning from exhaustion. The rain poured so hard it felt like the sky itself was collapsing. One moment I was gripping the wheel, the next, blinding headlights, screeching tires. The violent twist of metal against metal. Pain exploded through me before everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, weeks, maybe months, had passed. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit me first, then the slow, steady beep of a heart monitor. Tubes snaked out of my arms. My throat burned, my body refused to move. I had been in a coma. I blinked weakly and whispered the first word that came to mind. "Mom." The nurse beside me gave me a sad smile, one that told me more than her words ever could. "They haven't visited," she said softly, adjusting the IV. "Not once." Her words felt like a knife twisting deep into me. I thought maybe she was wrong. Maybe my parents didn't know I was awake yet. Maybe Ethan and Clara were too busy. But days passed, then weeks, and still, no one came. The nurses became my only family during those long, lonely nights. They told me how patients often had relatives who sat by their bedsides, praying, holding their hands. Some brought flowers, some brought letters. I received nothing. Not even a phone call asking how I was doing, and when the hospital bills arrived, reality struck even harder. My savings, everything I had sacrificed, every dollar I had poured into keeping my family afloat, were gone, not spent on me. Spent by them, while I lay dying in silence. It was then that I understood. I wasn't their son. I wasn't their brother. I was a tool, a source of money. A lifeline they discarded the second it wasn't convenient. For the first time in my life, I wished I hadn't woken up. Recovery was supposed to feel like hope. For most people, waking from a coma meant second chances. Phone calls from worried parents, embraces from siblings, tears of joy at a life restored. For me, it meant silence. Every day I opened my eyes in that hospital bed. I expected them to walk in. Maybe my mother would carry her favorite red scarf, the one she wore on Sundays. Maybe Ethan would clap me on the back with that careless grin of his. Maybe Clara, for all her arrogance, would at least squeeze my hand. But no one came. Not a single face from my so-called family appeared. Instead, I had the nurses. They became my comfort, my witnesses. One of them, an older woman named Grace, finally told me the truth that shattered whatever fragile hope I had been clinging to. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," she whispered one evening, pulling the blanket up over my trembling chest. "Your parents signed the discharge papers weeks ago. They told us they couldn't handle the burden. They left instructions that all medical bills should come from your account. And then, they stopped answering our calls." My throat tightened. "They left me." Her eyes softened with pity. She didn't have to say anything. The silence screamed louder than words. I tried to be rational. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't know how to deal with hospitals. But those excuses burned away when I checked my bank account. Empty. Every last cent gone. The money I had saved from years of backbreaking work, money I had thought might finally buy me my own little apartment, or at least cover my hospital costs, was drained dry. They had taken it all, abandoned me in that bed, and carried on as though I were already dead. It wasn't until Christmas that the betrayal cut deepest. The hospital was decorated with twinkling lights and paper snowflakes. Nurses wore Santa hats, patients exchanged cards and laughter. I lay there, scrolling through my phone with shaking hands, and then, I saw it. Photos of my family. There they were, smiling around a massive Christmas tree, holding glasses of champagne in a house I recognized. My house. The one I had worked 3 jobs to help them keep. Ethan wore an expensive suit, Clara flaunted designer jewelry. And my parents. They looked younger. Lighter, freer, as though the absence of their eldest child had lifted some unbearable weight. The caption below the picture read, "Finally, a Christmas with no losers. Just family." I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My heart clenched so tightly I thought the monitor would start screaming. My own family, celebrating the holiday while mocking me. The same son who had sacrificed everything for them. The tears came then, hot and relentless. But they weren't just tears of pain. They were the ashes of something burning inside me. Something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Hatred. That night, as fireworks cracked in the distance, I made myself a promise. I would never shed another tear for them. If they saw me as nothing, then I would rise from nothing. Not for their approval, not for their love, but for me. From that day forward, my heart hardened. The boy who begged for scraps of affection was gone. In his place stood someone new. Someone who would rise in silence, and when the time came, show them what their loser had become. The first few months after leaving the hospital were the hardest. My body was weak, my steps unsteady, and my spirit nearly broken. The world outside felt loud, fast, merciless. I had no family to return to, no savings, no home. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. But solitude has a strange power. When no one is there to hold you up, you learn how to carry yourself. A social worker named Daniel, one of the few who believed in me, helped me rent a tiny studio apartment. It was hardly bigger than a closet, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't pouring my earnings into someone else's pocket. I was surviving for me. Recovery was slow. I spent mornings forcing my body to walk again, afternoons reading about finance and business on a battered second-hand laptop, nights working whatever jobs I could find. I started with online freelancing, then small consulting gigs. It wasn't glamorous, but every dollar I earned felt like a victory, carved out of the ashes my family left behind, and something shifted inside me. The hunger they had mocked me for, the drive that once only served to keep them afloat, was now mine alone. I studied late into the night, teaching myself everything about investments, startups, and real estate. The more I learned, the more I realized that the world wasn't just about survival. It was about opportunity. Within 3 years, I had built something I never thought possible: my own company. What began as a small consulting service grew into a full-fledged firm, advising businesses and investing in struggling properties. I worked quietly, deliberately, never boasting, never posting pictures online. I stayed in the shadows, away from the family who had discarded me. And then, success came like a storm. Contracts rolled in. Deals closed. Investors called me. By the 5th year, my name carried weight in boardrooms. My bank account, once drained to nothing, overflowed. The boy who had been called a loser was now a man whose wealth outmatched everyone in his family combined. But I kept my secret close. I didn't want them to see me rise. I wanted them to forget me, to believe I was still the broken shadow they left behind. Because one day, I knew fate would bring us face to face again. And when it did, I wanted the shock in their eyes to cut deeper than any insult they had ever thrown at me. That day came sooner than I expected. I was sitting in my office, a glass tower overlooking the city, when my lawyer walked in with a file. He placed it on my desk with a quiet smile. "You're not going to believe this," he said. But your parents are being sued. Fraud, unpaid debts, embezzlement, the works. And guess who's been called as the primary creditor in the case? I opened the file and froze. There, stamped in black ink, was my family's name. Richard and Elaine. My parents. The ones who had laughed over Christmas dinner while I lay alone in a hospital bed. The universe has a cruel, poetic way of balancing things. They had drained me dry, abandoned me, mocked me, and now they were drowning in the very debt I once saved them from. And the courtroom they were about to walk into, I would be sitting on the other side. Not as their broken son. Not as their victim. But as the man they never believed I could be. The courtroom was cold, its high ceilings echoing every shuffle of papers, every cough, every nervous breath. I sat at the front, my suit pressed sharp, my expression unreadable. Years of pain and silence had carved me into someone unrecognizable, even to myself. When the doors opened, time seemed to slow. My parents entered first, flanked by lawyers, their faces drawn and pale. Behind them came Ethan and Clara, both dressed as if appearance alone could shield them from disgrace. Their eyes scanned the room casually, until they landed on me. The moment their gazes locked with mine, the color drained from their faces. My mother's lips parted in a trembling whisper. Aiden. My father's knees buckled, forcing him to grip the table for support. Clara clutched Ethan's arm, as if seeing a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. I was the man they had buried in silence, standing tall in the very place where their empire of lies was about to collapse. The judge began the proceedings, his voice steady, impartial. He read out the charges: fraud, embezzlement, unpaid loans, debts they had tried to hide under forged signatures. My parents' lawyer stammered, scrambling for excuses. But the evidence was overwhelming, and every piece of it had a trail that led back to the sacrifices I had once made for them. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I rose slowly, my chair scraping the polished floor. All eyes turned to me. My family's faces were twisted with shame and fear, but for the first time in my life, I felt no fear at all. I looked directly at them, my voice steady, cold but laced with years of buried hurt. You left me in a hospital bed. Do you remember that? While I lay in a coma, you signed papers to drain my account. Not a single visit. Not one prayer, not one flower. Just silence. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. I continued sharper now. On Christmas, I saw the pictures. The party, the tree, the champagne, and the caption, "No place for losers." Do you remember writing that? Because I do. I read it alone. While machines kept me alive. My mother broke into sobs, tears streaming down her cheeks. Clara bowed her head in shame, while Ethan clenched his jaw, too proud to admit the truth. You used me. You drained me. And then you buried me in your silence. But look at me now. I spread my hands, my voice rising just enough to echo through the courtroom. The loser you mocked is the one holding your fate in his hands. The silence that followed was suffocating. My parents' faces crumbled under the weight of truth. And then it happened. My father's chest heaved violently, his face turning ashen. He collapsed to the floor with a thud that rang louder than any gavel. My mother let out a piercing scream before fainting beside him, her body limp as the bailiff rushed forward. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge called for order, but I stood there, unmoving. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Just resolved. As medics rushed in to tend to my parents, I turned away. I didn't need to watch. Their collapse wasn't my victory. It was the natural weight of their own choices, finally crashing down. I walked out of that courtroom into the sunlight, breathing in the cool air as though it were freedom itself. For years, I had been the forgotten child, the abandoned son, the family's scapegoat. But not anymore. Sometimes, revenge isn't about shouting or breaking. It's about rising so high that your silence speaks louder than their cruelty ever could. And as I stepped onto the courthouse steps, I whispered to myself, they were right. There is no place for losers. Which is why I'll never sit at their table again.